Hi, this is Kevin Trainer. Welcome to my briefing on Chapter 20 of the Pinkham book. Chapter 20 is called Integrating Permissions. The title of the Pinkham book is Django Unleashed. This is one of the more important chapters that we're covering because it, I think, does a pretty full job of explaining Django's auth application, which is what we use for authentication. And this built-in application is much better than I would say 99% of us would be able to come up with on our own. I mean that. Well, let's say there may be 5% of us who know enough about security and authentication that we could design a competing solution. But for the rest of us, it's going to make sense to use this built-in version and perhaps strengthen it or modify it in ways that he explains in the next couple chapters. Okay? Because one of the things I always like to emphasize about creating your own code, not only do you have to design it, not only do you have to code it, not only do you have to test it, but you have to do those things continually over time as you maintain it. So as further releases that come out of Django, you have to continue to adapt and develop your homegrown approach to this requirement over time. It's quite an undertaking. And so we definitely want to use this and perhaps, again, use some of the tips and tricks that he presents in subsequent chapters to make it our own. All right. Let's see. He begins by, I think, doing a good job of explaining the database model classes that make up this scheme. And the big ones, for us at least, are users and groups and permissions. And I think he explains them well, so you definitely want to read through that part. He does, I think, a pretty good job of using the Python interpreter to kind of walk you through how these model classes work and how companion code that works with them can make it easy to use the classes. I think it's a real good orientation. It takes a lot of time to do all that typing in, and I'm the type who is more likely just to read through and follow along than to actually do it at the keyboard. But your mileage is going to vary, and you have your own style. Um, he explains that overall architecture. Um, there's a pretty good explanation in 20.3 auth app anatomy, permission and group models. So you get a really good idea about how this all works right there. Let's see where we go after that I think is pretty influential. The next thing we do is down in 20.4, he begins talking about protecting views with permissions. And one of the interesting things about Pinkham's book is he generally shows us several approaches to whatever we're doing. And he generally, he's shown us 3 or 4 approaches to views. So when he talks about how to protect views with permissions, he winds up showing us 3 or 4 approaches to that. But I think what's important to concentrate on here for us, because we went with class-based views in our class, in our own tutorial project, we're particularly interested in how to protect them in this scheme. And and so that's what I think you ought to put the bulk of your time into. Uh, we probably don't have many function-based views, so how you would protect a function-based view is interesting, but it's not going to get a lot of work done for us. Um, with that in mind, I want to point out that uh, the the support for class-based views in Django is strong, but it I would say it hasn't evolved as far as support for function-based views when it comes to uh, wrapping the view in a protective layer with a decorator. Okay, and because of that, we can't just use one of these decorators, which is really a wrapper. We can't really use one that's just out of the box. So he goes through several versions where he kind of shows the different kind of approaches we could take to custom decorators that would give us the kind of protection that we need using a decorator and doing it with the kind of views that we have, which are class-based views. And where he gets to in the end um, is that he creates 2 custom decorators. One's called Require Authenticated Permission, and the other one is Class Login Required. And I think these are, two, and your average kind of intermediate Python programmer, the object-oriented kind of guts of this are maybe a little challenging. Okay, so it might look a little bit magical. Okay, but they both work, and they both work well. One of these invokes the other, and so what we get left with is um, a decorator that will both require that the user have the proper permission and also require that they be logged in. It's kind of like a double shell that you apply at once. And I know in my tutorial code, what I did is I just borrow Pinkham's code. I would prefer that we were using code that was part of the Django distribution, right? And I would imagine that we're going to have code like that someday. But for right now, this code is certainly better than anything that I'm going to write myself, and that's probably true for a lot of you, if not all of you. And so what I've done is to adopt these 2 decorators, which again are wrappers that wrap around the view to protect it. I've adopted these 2 right into my code as they are. And in fact, in my tutorial video, I mentioned that we use this code, and in the starter files, I give you a copy of that code. Of course, you could also get it from the Pinkham distribution. Okay? So this is the approach that we're taking. So that when we're done, let's see, what's our last version of this? He has so many versions of things. Let's see if we can find. Right here. So down here in example 20.57, he's showing here's a create view that's got called post create, and it just has a single decorator that wraps this class, and it's called require authenticated permission. And what's the argument that we passed it? Well, we pass it the name of the app and the code name for the permission. So in order to get through here and actually go through the view and have it render the response, the user has to be logged in and they have to have the permission that we list here. Okay, and that's the last version that he gives us. Given that all along we've been taking pretty much the last version of his code, then that's the version that's going to work for us. Once you get the protection of the views done, okay, you've really protected your data, which is to say that users, when they go to try to click a button or a link that's going to take it to that view, if they don't have the authorization that they need to have, they're not going to get there. But what you're going to see is some pretty ugly results in the browser. For instance, a lot of these things will just give you a 403 forbidden, and that's all that's on the screen. Well, that's not good interaction design. So what we do is we put these tests in the template code in order to test whether the user has the permissions to see certain parts of our application. And what we're going to do is we're not going to render those in the template if this isn't something that the user is authorized to see or authorized to do. And starting in section 20.5, they show you some pretty good code for how you could add this template code to your template and control what the user sees and what they can do. And in our own Easy University tutorial, we do quite a bit of that, and I think you get a lot of hands-on opportunity to see how that works. That's about it. So I think there's a lot of good examples here. And we really do a full job in our own tutorial project. Again, I would advise that you put your time into that rather than getting the Pinkham code to run. Okay, so that's it for the chapter. I'm going to say bye until next time. Bye-bye.